Alrighty. G'day everyone and welcome to September's Meetup for this year. We are 1 month, surprisingly, we're 1 month away from our second birthday. So yeah, a little bit of a moment there. Thinking about that, I'm like, hey, we've been doing this for 2 years, which is pretty crazy. So yeah, so everyone, extend new people. Just yeah, I'd like to say welcome and hope you stick around. Um, also, yeah, we're also proudly sponsored by Hudson, um, Hudson Technology, Script Runner, and InSync. So Hudson Technology caters a lot of the events, with also providing a resource for us to actually meet. Obviously, during COVID, it's kind of not really happened, but Pablo's got some really interesting digs that we've got going in the future. So, huge thank you to Pablo and at Hudson for providing that. Also, big shout out to Scriptrunner for paying Meetup costs. So Scriptrunner, actually, we have them coming potentially next month to give us a new demo of what's been happening under the hood with those guys. So yeah, also huge shout out to Scriptrunner. And finally, InSync Technology. So InSync Technology caters some of the events and also kind of pays for some of the prizes and things like that and giveaways. Cool. So let's quickly go through it. Let's do a quick run through with the news. There's a little bit of stuff to go through, so we'll just kind of just try and power through it as quickly as possible. So first things first, we have the PowerShell and DevOps Global Conference 24-hour live stream. It's 100% 24 hours, completely free. So you can head over to the powershell.org/24hour. They've started to announce the lineup. So there are some people that have already been announced. So Thomas Rayner, I believe, Sydney. So a couple of the people from the PowerShell team are actually on there as well. So it'll be some interesting stuff there is going up. Also, Puppet has some DSC support now, so also you can go check that out. PowerShell 7 Preview 7 is out. So obviously new preview, new features. And then finally, a couple of things that's come out of Microsoft Ignite, which is Microsoft will be adding GitHub code space support to Visual Studio 2019 with a new release. Interestingly, another couple of things is Logic apps are being deployed as a containerized runtime now, which is, I'm interested to see how that goes, especially with the actual usage of Logic apps, because I know that Microsoft have been making a massive push for Power Automate. So personally, I'm a fan of Logic apps more than Power Automate, but I'm still very interested to see what's going on there. And I think that's a really good step forward. We got a was that someone asking a question?
Someone joined.
Oh, someone joined. Okay. So we also have apps. Service Premium V3 is out, so you can get an extended memory. So things like that have been announced from Ignite, which is pretty cool. And then finally, window container support in app services is now in general availability. So a couple of things there. And the final thing is, which again, this is just an extension from last month, the Lean Pub version of the PowerShell Conference Book Volume 3 is complete. So there should be no more editorial changes. So basically now the Lean Pub version is complete, so you can go ahead and buy it. From that, I know that the process for a paperback version is now underway. So it's at full price at the moment. So once the paper version comes out, I'm going to try and pick up a couple of copies, and we can use them as giveaways. So yeah, lots of good content. There's one of Jordan is an author in the book. So there's a couple of local names in there, and there's also a couple of big known names in there as well. So definitely recommend checking it out. Is there anything else that I've missed? Because I know that BW Merlin's just mentioned that Ansible's been announced with some major changes. anything else? All right. All right. Well, that's really it for me now. So I'm going to hand over to Derek, our guest speaker from Octopus Deploy. Derek, the floor is yours. I'm just going to stop sharing now. And
awesome.
There you go.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Hold on. Where it has.
If anyone's wondering, Derek's actually from Melbourne. They've been in lockdown so long that they developed their own accent.
I actually used to live in Melbourne, weirdly. Right. Let's, unfortunately, it looks like for some reason it's only giving me. Oh. Sorry, this it's a little bit. For some reason, it's not allowing me to share my virtual machine. Okay. Right. So you should be able to see the slides. Can you just confirm?
Yeah, we can see the slides, so it's good to go.
Excellent. Let's jump in. So, hello everybody. I'm Derek Campbell. On Twitter, known as DevOps Derek. I'm a senior solutions architect at Octopus Deploy. I'm not based in Australia, although I did live in Melbourne for three years. I'm based out of Glasgow. I work as part of the Octopus advisory team. What I do there is work with some of our largest customers and help them with Octopus Deploy. Today, I'm going to be talking about Octopus Runbooks, putting the ops in DevOps. I come from an operations background and moved into DevOps over a period of time. And today, hopefully, I'll show you how Octopus Runbooks will help you. So let's just jump straight in. What are runbooks? Runbooks are that ops side of DevOps. What you want to do is you'll use runbooks to automate routine configuration, maintenance, and emergency operations tasks. Think of things like infrastructure provisioning. So if you're doing Azure, you're doing ARM templates. If you're doing you're doing Terraform. If you're doing AWS, you're using CloudFormation or Terraform, or just basically Terraform. You can use it for things like dependency installation. So if you think of it as a web server, it's like installing IIS, DSC, etc. I use it a lot for turning infrastructure on and off. Database management, so you can do, say, restore from production back to test. I use it as well to do Windows updates. I do that. I've got like a home lab set up with 192 gig of RAM. I've got all that kind of kicking off. And what I'll also do is I'll show you today how you can use it with website monitoring, disaster recovery, failover, restore from backups, etc., and then restarting services. And one fun thing that I did actually implement at Octopus was monitoring. We were having some problems with Octopus.com. It was nothing to do with our code, thankfully. It was a third-party application that was overloaded, that was causing our website to fall over. So what I did is I used Octopus Runbooks to restart the web app, and it would bring it back up. Not ideal, but you know, these things happen in production. So why would you use Runbooks? One, because they're awesome, and also what you can do is Octopus, if you're using Octopus already, it's already aware of your infrastructure, and we do have some customers who just use Octopus for Runbooks, along with some minor deployments. The good thing is because Octopus is already aware of your infrastructure, it's very discoverable and very visible. You can use the Octopus permissions to manage your security permissions, and everything's audited within Octopus as well. And you can also use it for automation and scheduling. And one of the good things is the built-in steps as well as the community steps, which at the moment there's 431 the last time I looked. So you're looking at several hundred steps. You can use these as runbooks as well as in your deployment process. So if you're familiar with Octopus, it is a deployment automation tool. But with Runbook, you don't need to do like create releases. That's one of the main benefits, because Runbooks as a concept has been about within Octopus, but it would be a release that you'd have to create and then run that over and over. And the good thing is you can have one to N runbooks, so you can have as many runbooks in a single project as you wish. And there are slightly different permissions, and one of the main things is variables are shared, so you can use the same variables between your deployments and your runbooks. So with runbooks, you have to publish them. You would create a draft, you would probably run it in development or a test box, make sure the script does what you want it to do, or your runbook process is effectively just making sure that it does what you want to do, and then you would publish it. At that point, the draft becomes published and is then available for scheduled triggers and users with that runbook run permission. There are custom retention policies, so it's not the same as your project. And the good thing is you can edit it, the runbook, without affecting runs of the published version whilst you validate that it does what you want it to do. And you can also have environment scoped runbooks. So for instance, you can have a runbook that only runs in production. And yes, you can do it over the API as well. So anything that you can do with an Octopus, you can do it over the API, and that also includes runbooks. So Octopus Runbooks supports Python, PowerShell, Bash, C#, F#, and then with the configuration management, you can do desired state, change control with manual interventions, inventory management via Octopus as well, as long as the Octopus tentacle is there. And you can also use it for compliance management, such as your Windows updates, and then any sort of maintenance. So, demo time. I've got two demos for you today. I will switch back and forth just due to the way they're working. The main one will be OctoFX. OctoFX is a sample application that we use at Octopus to demonstrate the deployments and runbooks within Octopus. And this is the CI/CD pipeline. So I've got two projects, both of them in Azure DevOps. It's passing the code over to Octopus after it does the build. It runs a test, it creates those artifacts, and we host the artifacts within Azure DevOps and also Octopus. We're going to be pushing the build artifact over, then obviously it's going to do that deployment. But in this instance, we're not going to focus on the deployment side of things with Octopus. So I just want to cover the infrastructure high level so you can get a good idea. This is dev, so you'll have Azure DevOps pushing this over to Octopus Deploy. Octopus is going to be deploying three things. OctoFX is made up of a public-facing website. It's underpinned by an MS SQL database. And then lastly, there's a Windows service. OctoFX is a fictitious online London-based foreign exchange company where you can log on and buy foreign currency. In this instance, we are doing a deployment via Bastion box. The main reason we use Bastion box is it's a jump box. You generally don't want to install the tentacle on the endpoint. You don't want to open that up just in case. It's very secure, but your data is king. With this, we're deploying then directly to a web server, and then lastly, a rate service, which is just a Windows service which updates the foreign exchange rate. So that's dev. Test is very similar. You've got your same Bastion box, you've got your test via web VM, you've got the SQL, and then lastly, your rate service. Production is slightly different. It always is, I find. What you've got there is a highly available infrastructure. So that's you've got two you've got Web 1 and Web 2. That's behind an Azure firewall, a load balancer, sorry. Again, you've still got the Bastion box, you've got the SQL, and then lastly, the rate service box. We also have disaster recovery as well, and I will show you this today. DR is in a separate Azure data center. It's turned off at all times, apart from at night when it does a database refresh and a fresh deployment with any new code. So that's the infrastructure. Let's jump in, and we will start with OctoFX. So like I said, it's a foreign exchange application that people log on. And what I want to do today is I just want to give you a few demos. So you've got development. This is the deployment side of things. And I just want to show that there is no smoke and mirrors. So you'll see here that I did this roughly about a couple of hours ago. I just deployed this. So you can see here we've got a working website. Let's go back to test as well. And then There we go. And lastly, let's just go to samples. So what we've got here is we've got dev, we've got test, and lastly we have production. So we've got our work, and you see here that this is running on OctoFX Prod 2. So you've got your deployments, everything's working, everything's great. You can see your deployment process here. There's a manual intervention, you're doing some bits and bobs with SQL. And then lastly, you're deploying the database, the Windows service, you're stopping IIS, you're deploying OctoFX Web, and then starting IIS. And then lastly, just because I'm lazy and I don't like to type in URLs, I also like to write out the public URL. This is something that you use with Azure Web Apps, and it's just something I like. It is there with default. So runbooks, let's have a quick look. So with runbooks, you can do lots and lots of different things. If you can write a script, then you can run it as a runbook. I've got some examples here where I've got applying the Windows updates, I've got backup and restoring SQL from production to environment. We've got install dependencies, so there's a lot of chocolate installs. There's VS Code because Notepad is horrible, so I just install VS Code everywhere. And then you've got it installs IIS as well. And then here you've got a manual failover to primary. And then we also have that monitor. So I am actually going to show you this today. So what's going to happen is it's going to check production. It's then going to start the DR SQL and web, and then switches the DNS over with a 60-second TTL. You've got some bits here where we restart the app pool, because that kind of really helps with that self-service DevOps. You know, something crashes, instead of going to operations, you can actually enable self-service and then just allow that. You've got some IIS websites, you've got the rate service as well. And one that I like, and it's something I don't see enough of, what everybody seems to want to spin up the infrastructure fresh every time. It's not always possible. What I'm doing here is just showing you how you can turn your VMs off. So for instance, if you turn your VMs off at 5 p.m. and turn them back on at, say, 9 a.m., you could want to do that for dev and test. You may also want to do that for production. You know, it may be a site that you only use internally. You can get something like a 60 to 70% saving just by keeping servers on. So in this instance, you can stop them, you can start the applications, app pools, and then you can use it as well to upgrade Chocolate. So let's start and actually run some of these runbooks. So what we'll find, one last thing, you also can use triggers. So in this instance, so you each have, like I said earlier on, you've got 1 to n number of runbooks for your project. You can also use triggers and scope triggers to environments and also runbooks. So for instance, I'm applying my Windows updates to development on the second Wednesday of every month, starting at 12 p.m. Then disaster recovery goes out at 11 p.m. On the fourth Wednesday. That's after production is went ahead that morning. The good thing is you've got 12 hours. So say, for instance, something goes wrong in production, spin up disaster recovery, switch it over, and then you can fix that or uninstall the upgrades that broke stuff. And then you've got here, so you've also got that in test. This is the monitoring one. So every 15 minutes between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. it checks the website is up and it fails over. I will show you that in a moment. And then there's another few more. There's another few as well. We've got restore that production data to DR every evening. Then we've got restore production data to test daily. Start dev and test. Start DR for that nightly deploy. So that's if you've done a new deployment, then you can spin up DR that evening and then do a fresh deployment. That's part of your. I've actually got a deployment trigger that does that. And then lastly, there's some stopping and then stopping DR. Again, same idea. We run this where every Monday we check for Chocolate upgrades and also for VS Code. Okay, so let's run some of these runbooks. So we're not going to touch apply Windows updates. What we are going to just do quickly is this is just a one-step runbook. So what we've got here is just a single step that was written by one of the guys in my team. And what this does is it just runs and installs any updates and then restarts if required. I'll just show you this quickly. Oh, one thing just to be aware of, this is on samples.octopus.app. You can log in, so if you wanted to have a look at this, you can just log into samples.octopus.app in the browser as guest, and you can see all of this configuration. We're not hiding anything, honest. So what we've got here is just a PowerShell function, which is just running through and then installing. So this is the one that's probably of most interest, because as you guys are aware, code normally goes forward from dev to test to prod, but data is the other way. You collect the data in production, and you probably want to bring it back to test, because you want to test your code versus the latest data. Obviously, there's certain things you need to be aware of, and make sure that anything that's personally identifiable, you can use tools. Redgate have got a tool set where you can randomize that data. So that's just something to be aware of. But the process looks like this. Well, what we've got is a manual intervention for production only. The main reason is this is running in a context of test or development or DR. What you don't want to do is run it under production. The main reason is it's already in production. You could use it, like you may want to do a test restore to production, so you could use it in that. And that's the reason why we've got the manual intervention. So we've got some SQL where we're backing up the SQL database. One thing you'll probably notice here is you can make multiple edits. This is something that's pretty new. So we're using the Octopus variables, so you can see these under here. But what we've got is a specification of the server, the database, backup directory, the SQL login, the password. So you can see here that this is restoring. It's actually backing up production fresh. It's then stopping the app, that IIS app pool in, say, test, development, etc. It's then going through, it's stopping the Windows service. That's the rate service. The main reason for that is so that, because the rate service connects directly to the SQL database as well. What we've got here is a restore database step. We're then creating the SQL user if it doesn't exist, creating the database user if it doesn't exist, and then adding that database user to the role. Lastly, we're starting the application pool, and then doing the Windows service start, and then lastly writing out that restore URL. So let's run this. So what we've got is we've got production. You can see it's all working. What you want to do is you want to restore it to test. So select run. Here we go. Here we go. So what it's now going to do is going to run through that process. So let's jump into the task log. You can see here it's connecting to SQL is octofx_admin user. It's then backing up the data to Octo backups. So it's as Azure file directory, Azure files. Then it's stopping the rate service. So you can see here, this is all happening on test. Then it's stopping the rate service. It's restoring the database. So you can see here, it's went back in, and then it's testing it to test. So sorry, it's restoring it to test. It's then going in and just making sure the user's set up correctly. It's starting the IIS app pool. And then lastly, it's going to write out the restore URL. So there we go, bring this out. So what we should see is it should take a second to start because the application, there we go. So we've got that, we've restored the database. Again, you can see here that it's running an OctoFX test. Okay, so here we go. That's all happened. So what we've done there is taken the data from production, backed it up to a file store, then restored it in test. These ones as well, installing, so you can use Chocolatey. Chocolatey is a package manager, I'm sure you're all aware, and it's the best, it's the best thing after Octopus, of course. And then what we've got here is that IIS dependency, manual failover. And what I want to do is I'm going to fail this website. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select stop IIS app pool. So let's select run. And then I'm going to stop this in production. So select run. What we should see here is OctoFX prod 1 and prod 2 should follow. Let's close some of these tabs. So here we go. There we go. So what we should see in this is we got, yeah, there we go. We got a 503 error, which is to be expected. So what we've got is the monitor primary website and failover to DR if offline. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to run this because this does take a little, it does take a little moment to run. So select that, run it under disaster recovery. Let's just, we'll go back to Runbooks. And one of the good things that I like about this is you can add really good, you can add good notes. So you can add in Markdown, etc. So add in some description. The main reason is you'll thank yourself later on. So we come in, you can see disaster recovery is running, but what are we running? So what we've got here is a community step template, and this is the test URL. So you can see here, I'm just connecting to octopussamples.com. I'm looking for a 200 code. 200 codes up, make sure that the website's up and running. So what's happening here is it just every 15 minutes you're using, you can use a trigger for this. You could run it every 2 minutes, etc. But in this instance, I don't actually want this to fail over as I'm doing it. But so what we've got here is a few more steps. So everything's great here. The next few steps are actually just one thing to be aware of is like a run condition. So this only runs if the first step fails. So if it doesn't bring up the website, it will then come through and then it's going to start the web server in disaster recovery. So you can see here as a PowerShell script. So we're just setting some variables using the built-in. So you've got the OctoFX Azure web app name and then the resource group. And I'm just writing out a highlight saying starting the server. And then lastly, using PowerShell to start the Azure RMVM. So yeah, that's that. And then the others are very similar. These all happen in parallel. So you can see here that what we're doing now is we're now specifying the SQL Server name. And then lastly, we then have a Azure CLI script, which takes the IP address of production and switches it round with disaster recovery. You can see this here. Yeah, we've got the zone name, we've got the IP, and then we've got production. So what we should see is if we come back to the overview, this is now up. Yep, this is to be expected. So what we should see is it's failed because the website's offline. And then there we go. So failure has been, start web server. So starting OctoFX, that happened 1 minute ago. And then it's starting the SQL server. And then lastly, it's failing this over. So let's have a look and see if yeah, there we go. So everything now is working. So what we've got now is you can see here that this is running in disaster recovery. So you can imagine that, what did that take about, let's just go to the top. So it ran for 2 minutes. So if you had something like this, it means you don't have to pay for disaster recovery to be online at all times. But you know, this goes down like happens with Azure. It's a great platform, but you know, failures happen. You can actually have this. The time you get that text saying on your phone when you're on call, oh, website's down, you've logged on and Octopus Runbooks has already fixed that for you. So there we go. So we've got that, we've done that, and then we've monitored and failed over. So there we go. What we want to do now is we're going to just come in and then we came in, we know that production's back online. The main reason is we're going to start the application pool first. So we're going to run this in production. There we go. So start IIS app pool, select run. And this is going to start that application pool that we've done. So at this point, we should start seeing the application pool starting up. See, runbooks have been around for a long time. I remember having to do runbooks, and it was a bit of paper that used to get passed around. You know, new starter Joe Blogs is starting, so you get the bit of paper that said, you know, provision a server or a laptop, and you know, Exchange and Active Directory. Thankfully, all that now is much more straightforward. Okay, so this is taking a little bit longer than normally. Let's see if there's any tasks running. No. Into here. Let's go back to overview. There we go. So you can see here that this is working. It started OctoFX. Let's go back in and then do a manual failover to primary. So this doesn't run as part of our schedules, but we want this, and this is scoped just to production because we don't ever want to fail over to another location. So select run. What it's now going to do is it's going to do the opposite as to what I showed you earlier on. It's just going to run. It's going to run just the switch over. So let's have a quick look at that runbook. Actually, manual failover. It's a single step, and all this is going to do is fail over. So as you can see here, it's a AZ CLI script, which is just doing the exact opposite, where it's taking the DR IP and then switching it with the primary location. So what we should see is that this has now completed. There we go. And then if we do this, what we should see is, there we go, we're back on OctoFX Prod 2. The main reason we're back on OctoFX 2 is we have session persistence. So it's taken my IP, the protocol I'm using, and then located it and pushed it to the same location. Okay, so that's OctoFX. Obviously, you can go in and have a little bit of a play around. And then one last thing is I'm just going to stop the environment because we don't want to pay for that compute. So let's come in, we're going to stop disaster recovery. So what we should see, if we come into infrastructure, we should have a bunch of services. Oh, what's the unavailable? Oh, that's my demo laptop. There we go, that's fine. So what we should see is, you can see here that everything, so we've got a Bastion box, DR, everything's online. If you come into tasks, we should start seeing that these virtual machines are being turned off and deprovisioned. There we go. So what this is doing now is stopping SQL, stopping Bastion, and then stopping the rate service. So that's fine. I'll come back to that one. So the next up is Octo Pet Shop. Octo Pet Shop is similar. It's an application that we use at Octopus to demonstrate how Octopus works. So you can see here that this is trying to do a failed deployment, a deployment this morning. The main reason is we have no infrastructure. So if you go into runbooks, this is the opposite to what OctoFX does, where what we're doing here is creating the infrastructure on the fly. So you can actually run a runbook from within a deployment process. I've not done that today, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin up all the infrastructure required for development, test, and production. So let's have a quick run. There we go. This is going to take about 6 minutes. Of course, because I've said 6 minutes, you know it's now going to take 60. However, let's jump in. We can have a look at Octo Pet Shop. So, same idea. This is the deployment process. Manual intervention, because manual interventions are everywhere. And then we have, we stop the web apps. We then deploy the Octo Pet Shop web app, the product service, and then the shopping cart service. And then lastly, we deploy the database. And then we start the web apps after deployment. So just to give you some context, Octo Pet Shop is a web app, a website, funnily enough, that has a customer-facing website. It has, that's written in .NET Core. Then we have a shopping cart service, which is an Azure web app. It is exactly what it is on the tin. It's obviously a service that you can buy stuff and then add it to your shopping cart service. And then lastly, we're using a product service as well. So what you'll see, I will show you Octo Pet Shop, but you can add products. So for instance, you can buy an octopus on Octo Pet Shop, or a dog or a cat. I think there's also a goldfish. So what you've got there is that it can pull in that product service, so you don't have to add it in and then redeploy the full application, and then underpinned by an MS SQL database. So what we've got here is that's the deployment process for it. But let's jump in and have a look at the create infrastructure. As you can see up here on the left-hand side, spaces, we can switch between spaces. This is again on samples. There's lots of different spaces you can be aware of. But as you can see here, I'm running this under target-PaaS. That's platform as a service, as I'm sure you guys are all aware. And what I'm doing here is I'm deploying an Azure web app and an Azure SQL environment. And this is all running using Azure PowerShell, Azure CLI, and ARM templates. So what we're doing here is we're creating the resource group, we're deploying the Azure SQL Server, we're then deploying an empty database, we're creating the app service plan, which will then contain the app services. And then what we're then doing is we're creating the product service web app, we're registering the product service web app in Octopus, we're performing the health check. The main reason we do that is Octopus, at the beginning of every process, will check on what targets it's applicable to do a deployment to. And in this instance, we are performing the health check, so it's automatically added to Octopus. Again, same here. What we're doing is creating the shopping cart service, registering it within Octopus, we're then performing the health check, and then lastly, we're deploying the web app, registering it, and then performing that health check. Let's have a quick look. I'm going to just have a look at a few of the steps. So what we've got here is, we're using variables. We're just using some PowerShell where we're just checking and ensuring that the resource group is being added. Next step is the Azure SQL Server. So this is where we start using ARM templates. So here you can input, you can create your ARM template, put it in, and then match your variables here as well. Again, this is all, you can view and use this if you wish. A lot of it comes from the Azure Quick Start template guides. And then what we've got here is the admin login, password, etc., the location. These are all specified using Octopus variables. Next up, we deploy an empty database. Again, you guessed it, ARM template. Much smaller, this one. We're just specifying some database server names, the project database, location, etc. Then we're creating the app service plan. Again, you guessed it, ARM templates everywhere for everyone. So yeah, and then lastly, we are creating the product service. Again, ARM templates. So again, you can come in here, you're specifying your resources. And then lastly, you're registering this. This actually runs on a worker. A worker is similar to a deployment target, but it does more heavy lifting than a deployment target. So what we've got here is we're specifying all our PowerShell variables at the top and parameters. And then what we're then doing is invoke REST method, pushing in all this information about it. And then the web app is registered in Octopus. And then lastly, this is just a step where we're just doing a health check. At this point, what we should hopefully have is, if we come back to, obviously this is a different space than we were earlier on. There was one deployment target, we have 7. So we're missing 2. Let's have a quick look. We should have 1. Yep, there we go. So production is still deploying. Yeah, there we go. So it's just in the last web app. We should start seeing, and then lastly, development is likely around the same sort of stage. Yep, so it's just doing this. What we should start seeing is the last of, yeah, there we go, we have 9 healthy. And just one thing, just want to jump back to OctoFX, which is under target windows, and then there we go. So disaster recovery is now back offline. Let's go back, and let's go back to infrastructure. What you'll see here is we have one unavailable, but that's my laptop that I used. Let's have a look. Environments, disaster recovery. There we go. Check health. These should now be offline. Let's just actually have a quick look in Azure. There we go. And then have a look at the resource group. Oh. So let's just go. Okay. So let's have a quick look. And then what we should see is type virtual. I always find this a little bit tricky. So there we go. Actually, we should start seeing. So if we go into, let's go into virtual machines. This is a much better way of just showing you that everything. Yeah. And then this is turned off. There we go. So there we go. We got OctoFX DR, DR SQL, Bastion DR, and then lastly the rate service. So that's everything there is now offline. And that should there we go. So what we should now see, so back to platform as a service, into runbooks, create infrastructure. There we go. So we should see everything's working here. We've got infrastructure. We should see the 10. We've got 10 healthy targets. We've got the Octo Pet Shop product service. We've got the shopping cart service, and then the web app. And then lastly, we have each one. So that's just for development, and we have the same for production, and then the same for test. So just to finish off today's talk, and what I'm now going to do is, because you can see here, there was no infrastructure. We're going to try that again. We're going to deploy to development. And then here we go. So it's now going to stop the web app for development. It's going to acquire the packages. It's going to deploy the web app. It's going to deploy the product service web app, the shopping cart, the database, and lastly, start everything at the end of today's deployment. It's going to take some time. But yeah, let's just close this off. So this is going to take a little moment just to deploy. Then you see here, this is still updating. So again, back to OctoFX. This is actually whilst that's happening, this is something I was using recently. I got a new laptop, and one of the things that I use Chocolate a lot. It's one of my favorite tools, like I was saying earlier on. But what it is, I got a new Dell XPS with 64 gig of RAM, i9, 2 terabytes SSD, and it was sitting there, and I was like, and I was coming over from a Mac again. I was like, I've been on a Mac for the past 2 years, and I was like, I want to use Chocolate, but I don't want to type it all in, and I also want to have something that if I want to re-prep myself, my machine in the future, I can just do it. So one thing just to be aware of, you can use runbooks in Chocolate to not only just for laptops, but servers, on premises, and in the cloud. You can come up with a runbook that looks something like this, where what I'm doing here is I'm setting the UK time. So I'm basically, what I'm doing is using PowerShell to specify the UK. And then, because one of the things that really, it does annoy me a little bit, is that everything comes configured for the US, right? So again, I just don't want to select UK. I just want to install the operating system and then just let this runbook do it. So got some time set, I've got time zones, I've got some input languages. And then at this point, I'm then installing Chocolatey. This is just a community step template. I'm installing the Chocolatey packages. So there's something like 35 packages in here. So you can install SQL Server, Visual Studio. This all ran in what, 20 something minutes. And it was Visual Studio, like Visual Studio used to take like a day to run to just install by itself, but you can actually use this. And then I also use IIS quite a lot, as I'm sure you can imagine. So I'm installing IIS and dependencies. I'm deleting the default website because I hate the default website. It's just pointless. And then enabling Hyper-V because I use Hyper-V as my hypervisor, both on server and desktop. And then lastly, using that same Windows update so that you can get a freshly patched machine as well. Just something to be aware of. And then as that's happening, there we go. Let's deploy it to test as well. But whilst that's happening, let's go back to the here. So you can see here what we've done. Because the infrastructure is now available, we've done the deployment, everything's great. Going to use that URL here, and then there we go. So what we should see here is a development Octo pet shop where you can buy puppies, you can buy cats, goldfish, and of course you can buy an octopus. Let's just wait, and as you can see here, it's just taking a moment. There we go. So it's pulling these in from the product service. You've got your shopping cart service as well. You see up here, so we've got a dog because I love dogs. I've got 2 chocolate Labradors. And yeah, that is it. So what we've got now is it's deploying to test, and then I'll push it on into production. But you don't need to see that. You see that we're there. We've got working deployments. We've got great runbooks, and Octopus Deploy. Hopefully, I've showed you does some really cool stuff. So back to the slides. What I like to do is, obviously at the end of today's session, I'll take any questions. I like to just encourage other people to talk. I've dealt with imposter syndrome. I'm sure quite a lot of you do as well. It's something that can cause you some problems. How I've dealt with it is talking about it with other people. But it started off with friends and then colleagues. You'll find there that if you can't speak about imposter syndrome with colleagues, there might be a problem where you work. One of the big things that I do is mentally reinforce yourself. You compare yourself to other people, and you don't know what they know and what they don't know as well. But try and build yourself up. And honestly, it's okay not to know something. Just be honest about it. This is something because technology is released at such a pace. It's impossible to know everything all of the time. I'm a big fan of T-shaped learning. If you know a little bit about a lot, but a lot about a little bit, I'm a huge fan of that. Don't obsess about perfection. Quite often I've been, I think that I know nothing, and next minute I'm talking the most in the room. That may also just be about me. But like that, don't obsess about perfection. Quite often you have those conversations, you realise you're the expert, but you didn't realise it. Fake it until you make it. This kind of goes back to a particular story where I went in when I lived in London. I remember I was only maybe about 6-7 years into my IT career, and I had this meeting at a large organisation in central London, and the project manager backed out, and it was to go and talk to Oracle DBAs about Microsoft SQL Server, and I went in with an iPad. That was all. I was expecting just to do some diagramming and whatnot. And I remember being absolutely terrified before I went into that meeting. Absolutely terrified. And then what happened is I had a great meeting. Everybody loved it. And then I went on to develop a really great relationship with that organisation for about 5 years, where I was the technical lead. And it was really, really great. Give speaking a chance. It might not be for you. You might be a blogger. That's cool too. But if you know someone who does want to talk, encourage them. Listen to them, give them pointers, and don't burn them down. And just like to finish this off with, compare yourself to your yesterday, not someone else's today. People often have 10, 15, 20 years experience on you, even 5 years. We're not all Scott Hanselman or Troy Hunt. Just make sure that you're always learning. that you are being better than you were yesterday, and you'll find that imposter syndrome will slowly dissolve. But I don't think it ever goes away for everybody. Okay, so any questions?
I have a few.
Yeah.
When you're going through the stuff there, you're sort of editing, well, you're sort of going through all the stuff through the Octopus website. Is that something that's stored in like plain text files in a repository, or is it stored in some sort of SQL database in the back end? Is the only way to edit them through that actual website?
No. So there's a few. That's a really great question. Like, so the configuration of Octopus is stored within our Microsoft SQL database. The packages that you create are file level. That's under. So if you install, you can either have it on a network attached storage, or you can have it just in C Octopus artifacts. There's 3 directories. Like, once you go highly available, you need to share those on a NAS. But what you can do is you can source control things. So what you can within Runbooks, let's have a look. So let's create infrastructure, go into process. So within here, it's much the same. Like, to be honest, these are very, very similar. But what you can do is use the API. So you can automate things all over the API. Octopus is an API first product. So anything that you can do within a UI, you can do over an API. And there's a few different ways you can use PowerShell, Python, a lot of other languages as well. What you can also do is, obviously, from here, you can actually source control everything. So if you select, say, file inside that there, what you'll do is you'll integrate that with something like GitHub, and then you specify the source of what you want to run as well. So you can source control it. So within Octopus, you can do it where you write the code in Octopus and it executes it, or you can also have it on GitHub that pulls down a fresh version at runtime, and then runs that as well. Just so you're aware as well, we have configuration as code coming out as well. So that's going to be something that you can specify your entire project deployment process all within HCL. We haven't went with YAML because YAML, if I had hair left, I would probably pull it out. However, that's that may just be me.
So you're talking to the wrong person there. I love YAML.
Fair enough. We all have our own thing, but yeah, there's lots of stuff that you can do. HCL, I love HCL. I find it much more readable, but that's something that's actually going to be released. We're actually going to have I'm not sure if I can tell you, but on the 18th of November, you might want to check out Octopus. We are going to be having a big live event on configuration as code, so you'll be able to, and that's going to be source controlled as well. You'll be able to edit stuff in the UI. You're going to be able to edit in source as well. So you can, if you're comfortable writing code, then you can write your deployment process in code. If you're comfortable in the UI, you can also do it within the UI. And as you change it in the UI, it actually syncs back up to GitHub as well.
Cool. Okay. I don't want to take too many of the questions. I just have one.
No, go for it.
Do you have like a role-based access control? So like you're logged in under Derek. Can you limit certain runbooks or actions to particular users? So like you sort of have it as a self-service tool for help desk people or stuff like that?
Yeah. So like just so you're aware, with Octopus, we integrate a lot with it. We integrate with Azure Active Directory, Google Apps, Active Directory, Okta, etc. And yes, what you can do here is, because what you've got is you've got users, right, which will sit within teams, and then you assign the permissions to the team. So what you can do, so like if you see here, so user roles sit within teams, and then users are attached to teams. And then what you can see here is we've got lots of different permissions here, but we have a runbook consumer and also a producer. So producing is what I've just done there as well, and then consuming is running it. So what you can do there, is it Jordan?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, what you can do there, Jordan, is you can give access to people just to run the runbook. But yeah, and unfortunately, we don't have fine granular control that you can scope it to one particular runbook. It's either you have access to all runbooks or no runbooks. So that's just something to be aware. It's something that we are looking at. This was only something that we released in January this year. So there'll probably be a few changes to them over the next kind of 12 months.
Yeah, cool. Okay, I'll let other people ask questions now. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Jordan.
I had some
Any
follow-up,
other
and I
questions?
totally forgot them.
I have a question. Just on the, it's Wayne here, by the way. Just on the input parameters for the run books, can you do any validation on that?
I don't think so, no.
That's fair enough. It's just one of the annoying things that we found with Azure DevOps is you can't do it either there.
Yeah, I don't think there's any sort of validation in a way is, unfortunately, the way it's built is when you're running it.
Couldn't you have like a script that reads those parameters and fails if they don't meet your validation?
Expect there probably would be a way.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't know it off the top of my head. But yeah, I expect, to be honest, I think we had something that one of the guys created where you can do some validation, but I'd need to double check. There was a blog about it, and I know it was more about deployment processes. But yeah, that's a good question. Unfortunately, I don't know the answer, Wayne.
No problem.
I've got a quick question. Totally unrelated to the actual Octopus. It's more just from your personal experience with using it for your own machine. Is one of the things that I am personally doing is procrastinating about rebuilding my machine because I know that there's an insane amount of work that's required to get it configured. In terms of obviously to be able to actually deploy Octopus I'm guessing you would need some sort of worker client that would need to be installed onto the machine initially. How difficult is that from an initial configuration point of view? Because ultimately, once you've obviously got the worker installed, then you can pretty much just run your runbooks. So
yeah, it's a tentacle, but yeah, you can. What I tend to do is I install it as part of the operating system. So what you can do is say, for instance, you come to docs. So for instance, I use Chocolatey, right? So Choco install octopus deploy .tentacle, and then you've got automating tentacle installation. So there is some configuration required. So what you can do here is, so obviously this is a bit that deals with installing. So you can do it there. So if you're using SCCM, you can do that. And then what you can do is effectively, this is a listening tentacle. So this is where the Octopus server then connects to the tentacle. So it's inbound. This is definitely my preference. I use our cloud account a lot. So with that, I don't want to open my firewall to get them, because like the laptop I ran it on was this one, and then the demo laptop, I've got two laptops here. But you can do that, then automatically do it, because that's the thing. Because if you see here, so what you install the tentacle and then you configure it. So in this instance, I used a polling tentacle so that it went out to the Octopus server. So this is a polling tentacle. So you change to the directory, then so you create the instance, you create the certificate that it uses for Octopus, and then what you need to do is just one thing is the server, the name of the tent, and then you have to use your API key. So you can come into Octopus and then create under users. You can create, say for instance, here's me. And then I just create my API key, and then I can do that as a script, or I can just do it manually.
Okay, that's really cool. And then I'm guessing from once you've enrolled that machine, I'm guessing you tag it with a specific type, and then from that type, that will then apply to what specific runbooks you want to apply.
Yeah. Okay. So in this one, I'll give you a quick. I'll show you. So what I've done is created a project called Computer Provisioning, right? I've then created the runbook, but what I've done is I've added I've added an environment, right, called provisioning. Actually, one sec. Let me just turn this laptop on quickly. I'm a huge fan of this. This is something, it's just about, you know, you want to probably re-prep your machine, once a year, but it's a nightmare. You know, you don't really have, let's just see here. It should restart. But yeah, so I've created an environment called provisioning. I've added let's just see. I've added to that laptop, I've added a machine. It's called computer. And then from there, I then use that target role to then run my steps. So like, for instance, in the runbook, install the developer machine. See here that they're all set to run on computer. So from there, and then I select run, and then I can there is only a single environment in this one, so I can run it on provisioning, and then it would then run through everything.
Okay, that's really
create
cool.
The target role environment, yeah.
That's really cool. Cool. Thank you.
I do have one question as well. Just with regards to runbook scopes, I think you said at the start that they're tied to a project. I'm just curious. How would you spread them out across different projects? I mean, would you just clone them, or can you have them at a global level that'll always be defined, or how would that work?
Great question. We don't have them globally. There's ways to do it globally. Like, for instance, you could just, like, you'll see here with computer provisioning, you can see deployments, but you don't see anything under it, right? The main reason for that is we don't have a deployment configured for it, so it hides this. For runbooks, when the scope that it falls under, I've completely lost my train of thought there. Sorry, can you ask that again?
Oh, okay. Well, let's look at this particular scenario. Okay. Now, I would guess, let's say, if I'm using Octopus for deploying microservices, which I've done before, and you might have, let's say, 10 microservices. Now, and you might have, say, 5 runbooks that you want to do. I would imagine you would set up your first microservice project here, and then you would just clone that for the others.
That's exactly what you would do. So within here, you can just clone it. Unfortunately, there are ways to do this. So, like, for instance, what you could do, think about it as, say you wanted to do Windows updates. It's something I use. Like, I use Windows Update. I use runbooks to do a bunch of Windows updates. Say you wanted to do that, you could just attach it to, say, for instance, you wanted to upgrade cycle 1, cycle 2, cycle 3, cycle 4. You could just add that target role to all of your targets and then run it from within that project and target all servers. So there's ways to do it globally, but there's the concept of a global runbook doesn't really exist. So if you set up the full process, you can clone it. So you can select clone, and then you can basically, obviously, you can clone that into a different process. Another way to do it is to use step templates. So you create, say, for instance, you're doing custom configuration, add it as a custom step template, and then use that step template as part of your deployment, your runbook.
I see what you mean. Yeah. So essentially, you would treat a separate project as sort of like a global thing, and use the roles to spread it out.
Yeah.
In a way. Okay.
There's ways to do it, but it's not always apparent.
Okay. Cool. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Any other questions?
I'm probably going to have some additional questions, but what I might do is, if anyone has any additional questions, if you just flick them to me through the Slack channel. If you're not a member of the Slack channel, just post the link now in the chat, so you can go ahead and join. And then basically just send me a DM, or you can just ask a question, and I can forward those questions onto Derek. So, give me 2 seconds. It was really good, Derek. That was really good.
Thank you. As well as that, if you want to, I'm on Twitter. So if you catch me on DevOps Derek. Octopus-wise as well, if you do want to reach out about Octopus, you can email me at derek.campbell@octopus.com. We also have an advice. So if you're using Octopus and you get stuck on something, then you can actually email advice@octopus.com. We also have a user Slack as well. So you can join at octopus.com/Slack. Any questions, happy to answer.
It's really good.
And thank you very much, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Derek. That was really, really good. It was incredibly insightful. A couple of things I actually have to admit. I remember I was looking at the runbooks and just the way that it was like the way that running runbooks was just seemed so much easier. That was something that actually was quite interested in. Then when you mentioned that having it for home use, I was thinking I could actually implement that.
Yeah, honestly, it's funny. I use it like I've got like something like 28 VMs or something like that in my home hypervisor, and I use it for the most basic things. The most basic things that actually annoy me, like those updates. Here's a fun one for you. I have a HA setup of Octopus, and I have a single node setup. I use them for different things, but I have runbooks upgrade each other. So I still like the latest and greatest on both. So I actually use Chocolatey to upgrade. So at 5 a.m., the HA cluster gets upgraded by the single node, and then the HA cluster gets upgraded by the single node.
That's
lots and lots of stuff to do.
That's
and
really cool.
It's free as well for the first 10 deployment targets.
I was actually just looking at the pricing, and I was like, "That's free, yes."
yeah. It's awesome. It's like you can even the cloud version is free as well, so you can use that for up to 10 deploy. I still like a little bit on prem. I use cloud a lot, but I still use it on premises quite a lot as well.
Yeah. Yep. No, that's really cool. Does anyone else have any other questions they want to quickly raise before we wrap up?
I did have one quick question, and obviously, Wayne here again, by the way. It did say she showed Azure DevOps, and then you showed Octopus, and obviously there's a lot of overlap between the capabilities of those two tools. What do you see customers doing?
We will definitely, we've lost a few customers to Azure DevOps, but to be honest, at the same time, we've also taken on new customers as well. You're absolutely spot on. There is a lot of crossover. There is, the CI side of things. Obviously, not. We don't do any sort of build, but yeah, there is. It's a really good one. And to be honest, I like Azure DevOps. It's a great build tool. I don't think it's anywhere near as good as Octopus when it comes to deployments. I don't think it's as mature. We've got multi-tenancy, so you can have thousands of tenants all ruled by a single deployment process. That concept, that's all single projects, single code bases. There's a lot of reusability within Octopus that isn't there within Azure DevOps. I'm obviously a little biased, but I think it's by far the better deployment tool. But yeah, I mean, people are going to use it, and also it's really cheap or effectively free. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing. There's a lot of great stuff, but I think Octopus is more mature. And also, when you look at Azure DevOps, and if you compare, so you've got the deployment aspect of Octopus, but you also have the runbook aspect. With your deployment, you actually can use runbooks to do your operation and maintenance and whatnot. You've got Azure Automate, right? So it's very similar, but Azure DevOps and Azure Automate sit completely away from each other. You don't know what's happening in each environment. Whereas with Octopus Deploy and runbooks, you've got that all in a single bit of software in a single dashboard, and you can see that. So I agree, Azure DevOps is great, but I think Octopus personally does it a little bit better. It's more mature. You've got lots of other stuff there like multi-tenancy that Azure DevOps just doesn't do. But yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. No, that's good.
You might get those customers back when Azure DevOps is deprecated soon.
Yeah, it's
don't say these things.
No, I think so as well. I think it's going to go. Everybody who used to work on Azure DevOps is now a GitHub employee.
Yep, that's true.
The problem with compared to GitHub is the fact that DevOps has, I don't like GitHub Actions. Like I like the YAML based approach, but I find DevOps is just a little bit more intuitive. I think the learning curve, if they're going to just drop DevOps, they're going to have to lift and shift a lot of that kind of intuitiveness into GitHub Actions. But
they will. It's going to take about, I reckon, 4 years or so. I mean, they're definitely not going to drop Azure DevOps like a hot rock. But you watch, it'll gradually. I mean, I agree. Of the two right now, Azure DevOps is probably a better tool, but over the next 2 or 3 years, you'll see everything being pushed more towards GitHub from Microsoft's point of view.
And what will probably happen is it's probably, you're definitely be right there, because what's going to be obviously with the, like if you look at when Microsoft bought Skype, so they had Link, which went with Skype for Business. And then basically as they still bought Skype, now Skype for Business still used on-prem VoIPs and things, on-prem SIPs and things like that. Ultimately, obviously, with Teams now, and you've got actual calling for Teams, and you have Telstra calling for Teams, you can have, it's a lot of the internal calling mechanisms within it. It's actually leveraging Skype itself and not the actual services that you provision. So there's a lot, like, I actually personally, I do think it's, I think you're probably going to be right with that. But GitHub Actions has got a long way to go before that. So I honestly think, for 4 years, that's plenty of time for a product to be matured. So, but that's cool. Thank you, Derek. That was really good. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
So like Derek said, you can follow him on Twitter at DevOps Derek, and then obviously you can ask him some questions on there, and also you can just feel free to ask questions on Slack. I just saw a quick thing pop up on Slack. I just want to see if it's Slack. Okay, Chris. G'day, Chris. Welcome to the Slack. Feel free to post it in Slack as well. I can pass it along to Derek. But anyway, guys, thanks for that. I'm going to stop recording now. So